My name is Sergeant Kenia Hayes, and at 29 years old, I've served my country through 2 overseas deployments. But no battlefield was ever as brutal as my parents' living room in Pennsylvania. Do you even hear yourself, Dad? The words tumbled out before I could stop them, but his face didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. You're uneducated trash, he said, each word sharp and deliberate, like he was cutting me out of the family one syllable at a time. Mom didn't even wait for him to finish. Get lost. You're a nobody, she snapped, her voice breaking only slightly, as if even she knew she'd gone too far. But pride wouldn't let her take it back. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Before I tell my story, let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe. If you've ever been cast out by the very people who were supposed to love you most, this is the story of how one rejected soldier built an empire of her own. The silence in that small Aliquippa house was a physical weight. It pressed down on my shoulders, heavier than any rucksack I'd ever carried. Outside, the December snow fell in thick, silent flakes, blanketing the dying town in a shroud of white. But the cold in that living room was a different kind. A deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It radiated from the 2 people sitting across from me on the faded floral sofa, a relic from a time when this house and this family might have known some semblance of happiness. Now, its once bright roses were muted, worn down by years of unspoken resentment. I sat opposite them, my back ramrod straight, a posture drilled into me at basic training that had since become a permanent defense mechanism. My father, Frank, stared at the television, though I knew he wasn't seeing the Steelers game that flickered across the screen. The muted cheers of the crowd were just background noise to the storm brewing inside him. His silence had been a tactical weapon all through dinner, a prelude to the inevitable bombardment. He finally broke it with a sudden, violent motion, slamming the remote control down on the scarred wooden coffee table. The plastic clattered with a dry, dead sound. It was the sound of his patience finally snapping. He looked at me then, and his eyes held the same expression of weary disgust he usually reserved for a broken lawnmower or a rusted tool in the back of the garage. I was a problem to be dealt with, a disappointment that had taken up space for far too long. I felt the familiar tightening in my gut, the bracing for impact. He was searching for an excuse, a spark to light the fuse of his own failed ambitions. My mother, Carol, was a ghost in the room. She bustled around, clearing away imaginary dust, her back turned pointedly towards me. It was a defensive stance she had perfected over decades, a way of disappearing in plain sight. She was an expert at being present but absent, a silent co-conspirator in my father's quiet war. The air was thick with the faint, stale scent of Iron City beer from my father's can, and the suffocating history of everything left unsaid. Saw the Peterson kid today, Frank began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. The opening shot had been fired. Just bought his folks a new house over in Hopewell, works at the bank, a real job. What about you? His gaze swept over my uniform, the one I had worn with pride just hours earlier at a recruitment event. Now, under his scornful glare, it felt like a costume. He jabbed a finger in my direction, the nail thick and yellowed. What about you? Still playing soldier in that camouflage getup, running around as a government pawn. A damn waste. I took a slow, measured breath, the kind they teach you to control your heart rate before you enter a hostile situation. Dad, I'm a sergeant. I started, my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil inside. He cut me off with a wave of his hand, a gesture of absolute dismissal. I don't give a damn what you are, he roared, his voice bouncing off the thin walls. To me, you're just the kid who quit. Took the easy way out because you weren't smart enough for anything else. The words were meant to wound, and they did. But it was the accusation of taking the easy way out, after 2 tours, after years of sacrifice, that finally broke through my defenses. That's when I asked the question, the one that sealed my fate. Dad, do you hear what you're saying? His face, already hardened by bitterness, seemed to turn to granite. The simmering anger boiled over into a cold, cruel fury. And then came the words, delivered like a final verdict. You're uneducated trash. He spat them out, each syllable precise, designed for maximum damage. In that moment, a desperate, foolish hope flickered inside me. I looked at my mother. Her back was still to me, but she had frozen, her hand hovering over a picture frame. I prayed she would turn, that she would say something, anything, to stop this. For just 1 second, I let myself believe the mother was still in there somewhere. She turned, and she became his ally. Her eyes met mine, and there was no softness, no sympathy. Only a cold, hard reinforcement of his command. "Get out," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. It trembled, but not with sadness. It trembled with the sheer force of her own cruelty. "Your brother needs our help. He's struggling. You being here is just a distraction. You are nothing." She hadn't just told me to leave. She had erased me. With those 3 words, "You are nothing," she had nullified my entire existence. The sergeant, the soldier, the daughter, all of it gone. I stood up. My body moved with an efficiency born of training. There were no tears. My tear ducts had been cauterized long ago by discipline and necessity. The military had given me many things, but the most useful was the ability to compartmentalize pain, to lock it away behind a wall of steel until it could be dealt with later. Or never. I gave a single, sharp nod. It was the only response I could manage. I was accepting my final orders from my commanding officers. As I walked to the front door, I could feel their eyes on my back. I didn't turn around, but I knew what I would have seen. Not regret, not sorrow. I would have seen the quiet satisfaction of a problem finally being removed. I stepped out onto the porch, the frigid air a welcome shock to my system. My boots crunched on the freshly fallen snow as I walked to the rental Ford parked at the curb. I slid into the driver's seat, the synthetic fabric cold against my skin. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead quiet of the winter night. It echoed through the sleeping streets of my hometown. But it wasn't the sound of a retreat. It wasn't the sound of defeat. It was a bugle call. It was the signal for a new mission to begin. The mission to liberate Kenia Hayes. And it was starting now. Driving south on Interstate 79, away from the biting Pennsylvania winter, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt became a hypnotic drone. The landscape blurred into a gray and white smear, but my mind was painfully clear. It's funny how a single, devastating moment can act like a key, unlocking a vault of memories you thought you'd buried. The expulsion order from my father wasn't the start of the war. It was just the final battle in a campaign that had been waged against me my entire life. Tonight's cruelty wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination. The ghosts of my past rode with me in that rental car, their voices clearer than the radio. I remembered Sunday dinners. They were a ritual in our house, an institution. My mother would spend all afternoon making a roast turkey, its rich, savory scent filling our small home. And I was her loyal sous chef. I peeled the potatoes, snapped the green beans, and set the table with our good plates. I did it because I loved her, but also because of a desperate, childish hope that my contribution would be seen, that my effort would earn me a seat at the table, not just physically, but emotionally. But once we sat down, I would disappear. The spotlight in the Hayes family had only enough room for one, and that was Adam. My father would hold court, his voice booming with pride as he interrogated Adam about his latest triumphs on the high school football field. "How many touchdowns, son? Did you see the look on that quarterback's face when you sacked him?" He would ask about Adam's girlfriends, the pretty cheerleaders who were always hanging on his arm. Adam, my older brother, would soak it all in, the golden boy in his kingdom. Any attempt I made to enter the conversation was swiftly shot down. A story about winning the science fair or getting a perfect score on a history paper was met with a dismissive wave of my father's hand. "That's just book stuff," he'd grunt, already turning his attention back to Adam. "Pay attention to your brother." That's how a Hayes gets ahead in this world. It was a lesson I learned early and painfully. In the constellation of our family, Adam was the sun, and I was just a nameless, orbiting rock, useful only for reflecting his light. My role was to be the quiet, helpful, invisible daughter. The memory that stung the most, the one that still had the power to make my throat tighten, was from the Christmas I turned 16. I'd been working after school for months at a local pizza place, the smell of garlic and yeast clinging to my clothes every night. I saved every single dollar, carefully tucking it away in an old shoebox under my bed. My father had been talking for years about a high-end fishing rod and reel combo he'd seen at the outdoor supply store. It was his holy grail. So I saved, forgoing movies with friends and new clothes, all for the singular goal of seeing his face light up on Christmas morning. I remember wrapping it meticulously, my heart pounding with anticipation. On Christmas morning, I waited until the end, handing him the long, awkwardly shaped box. He took it, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He tore off the paper, and for a moment, he just stared at the gleaming graphite rod and the polished silver reel. I held my breath, waiting for the smile, for the hug, for some sign that my sacrifice had meant something. Instead, he set it aside, leaning it against the wall. "Thanks," he said, his voice flat and noncommittal. That was it. A few minutes later, Adam handed him a lumpy, poorly wrapped package. Inside was a Steelers sweatshirt, the kind you could buy at any department store. My father's face broke into a wide, genuine grin. He let out a whoop, pulling it on immediately over his shirt. He paraded around the living room, showing it off to my mother, boasting about his incredible son. Later that night, when I went to take out the trash, I saw my gift. The fishing rod was propped up in a dusty corner of the garage, forgotten, untouched. My gift, like my efforts, like me, was simply not good enough. But the true moment of clarity, the one that planted the seed of my escape, came on a feverish night a year later. I was sick with the flu, shivering under a mountain of blankets, my body aching with a deep, miserable pain. Sometime after midnight, I drifted into that hazy space between sleep and wakefulness and heard my parents' voices from the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. "She's sick again," my mother said with a heavy sigh. "That's another copay down the drain." My father's reply was laced with irritation, a sound I knew all too well. "She's always been a fragile one, not like Adam. That kid's a fighter. Sometimes I wonder if she's even worth the trouble." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The words hung in the air, more chilling than the winter draft seeping through the old window frames. Worth the trouble. In their eyes, I was a liability, a bad investment, an entry on the wrong side of their life's ledger. The physical pain from the fever was nothing compared to the cold, hard certainty that washed over me. My very existence was being weighed and measured, and I had been found wanting. That was the night the little girl who desperately wanted her father's approval died. In her place, something harder began to form. So, on a Tuesday afternoon in my senior year, I didn't tell a soul where I was going. I walked straight past the college guidance counselor's office and down the street to the Army Recruitment Center. The recruiter, a sergeant with kind eyes and a firm handshake, asked me why I wanted to join. I didn't tell him about the Sunday dinners, or the Christmas gift, or the hushed late-night conversation. I didn't tell him I was running away. Instead, I told him I was running towards something. "Sir," I said, my voice steady, "I want to find a place where my worth is measured by my actions, not by someone else's opinion. I want a family that's built on respect." The day the bus came to take me to Fort Jackson for basic training, no one from my family was there to see me off. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window at the gray, tired buildings of Aliquippa, the rust-colored skeletons of the old steel mills, standing silent against the sky. I made a quiet vow to the reflection of the girl in the window. The person they had left behind would not be the one who returned. After being expelled, I didn't just drive aimlessly into the night. My retreat from Pennsylvania was strategic. I wasn't fleeing, I was advancing to a new position. I had a destination: Florida. As the plane cut through the dark sky, leaving the frozen Rust Belt behind, my mind was no longer occupied with their venomous words. Instead, I let it travel back to the real beginning of my liberation, the starting point of my secret campaign. It began on a dreary, rain-soaked afternoon at Fort Hood, Texas, nearly a decade ago. While other soldiers in my platoon headed off base for beers or settled into the barracks for a session of Call of Duty, I sought refuge in the quiet solitude of the post library. It was my sanctuary, a place where rank didn't matter, and the only orders you had to follow were the Dewey Decimal System. Tucked away in a dusty, forgotten section, I found a worn, hardback copy of a book called The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. I didn't open it looking for financial advice. I didn't even really know what I was looking for. But as I read, something clicked into place with the force of a rifle bolt, locking into battery. I wasn't reading a book about finance. I was reading a field manual for a different kind of warfare. Graham wasn't just talking about stocks and bonds. He was talking about assessing a target's intrinsic value, about managing risk, about maintaining emotional discipline, and about striking with decisive force when your adversary, the market, was gripped by panic. For the first time, a thrilling realization dawned on me. The world of finance was just another battlefield, and the United States Army had inadvertently trained me to conquer it. My first mission began with my meager soldier's salary. It wasn't much, but I learned to live with a Spartan-like frugality that made my fellow soldiers scratch their heads. I saved every single dollar, treating my bank account like an ammunition depot, stocking up for the right moment. That moment came in 2012. The financial world was in a full-blown panic about the future of Apple after the death of Steve Jobs. Analysts were screaming that the magic was gone, that the company was a rudderless ship. But I didn't listen to the noise. I did my reconnaissance. I spent my nights in the barracks not watching movies, but poring over Apple's financial statements, their balance sheets, and their income reports. I read them like intelligence briefings, identifying their strengths and weaknesses. I saw a fortress with impenetrable economic moats, brand loyalty, a closed ecosystem, and a mountain of cash. While everyone else saw fear, my training allowed me to see an opportunity. I gathered all my savings, every penny I'd scraped together, and I executed the mission. I invested it all in Apple. On the rare occasions I called home, my family's reaction was predictable. I tried to explain what I was doing, but my words were met with scorn. "Still throwing your money away on foolish things, I see," my father said, his voice dripping with condescension. I could hear my mother in the background, telling him not to bother. To them, I was just a girl playing with her little allowance. But I didn't waver. I trusted my analysis. I held the line. It was the first step in a long, silent war of independence. As the profits from that first mission began to accumulate, I didn't cash out and celebrate. I redeployed my capital. I diversified my fronts. My next target was real estate. The country was still reeling from the 2008 financial crisis, and the housing market was a landscape of carnage. I studied foreclosure maps the way I'd once studied topographical maps of Afghanistan. I applied the same core principle. You buy when there's blood in the streets. From my barracks in Germany, from a forward operating base in Kandahar, I conducted my operations. Each transaction was a covert op, executed through encrypted emails and satellite phone calls to a trusted real estate agent back in the States. I bought repossessed houses in recovering cities, properties that fear had made cheap. No one in my life knew. To my family, I was still just poor Kenya, the girl who was playing soldier because she had no other options. They could never have imagined that the daughter they dismissed as uneducated trash was silently, methodically, building an empire right under their noses. I didn't do it to show off. I didn't do it for revenge, not at first. I did it to build a fortress. A sanctuary so strong, so secure, that none of their toxic words could ever penetrate its walls again. And now, tonight, I was standing inside that fortress. On the balcony of a sprawling villa in Naples, Florida, overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. The gentle, rhythmic shushing of the waves on the shore had replaced the sound of my father's yelling. The warm, salty air was a world away from the suffocating chill of that Pennsylvania living room. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, the screen glowing in the twilight. The number was still there, a silent testament to a decade of discipline, strategy, and solitude. $60 million. This wasn't luck. This wasn't an inheritance. This was the spoils of a war nobody knew I was fighting. This house wasn't just something I bought, it was my Medal of Honor, earned in a campaign of silence. And if you've ever had to fight your own silent battles to prove your worth, not to anyone else, but to yourself, support this story by hitting the like button and tell me about it. Just comment with a single word that describes the first thing you bought for yourself that made you feel truly independent. From this new command post, I would wait. Because I knew the enemy, I knew their tactics, and I knew that soon enough, they would launch their first reconnaissance probe to figure out what had happened to the asset they thought they owned. And this time, I was ready for them. 3 weeks passed, 21 days of absolute, unbroken silence. I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't send a single signal to indicate I was even still alive. I was following their last order to the letter, get out. But in the military, you learn that silence is rarely empty. It's a strategic tool. A void can be more powerful than a presence. My absence, the very thing they had demanded, had now created a vacuum in their small, tightly controlled world. It had become a question mark hanging in the air, an unknown variable in their predictable equation. And as I had anticipated, they couldn't stand the uncertainty. My radio silence was a tactic, and it was forcing them to make a move. The first signal came, as expected, through an unofficial channel. A Facebook message from my cousin, Mia. Mia was the family's designated grapevine, a notorious gossip but generally harmless. She operated as the informal intelligence network for the Hayes clan. Her message popped up on my phone one evening as I was watching the sunset from my balcony. Hey Kenia, you okay? Aunt Carol and Uncle Frank are saying some weird stuff. They're telling people you just disappeared. I stared at the message, and a slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. Weird stuff. That was code. It was their admission that the narrative had slipped from their grasp. For the first time, they weren't in control of the story. I deliberately waited a few hours before replying. It was a small, calculated move to assert control over the tempo of this exchange. When I finally typed my response, I kept it brief, friendly, and maddeningly vague. I'm great, Mia. Just enjoying some sun down in Florida. That tiny breadcrumb of information worked exactly like a smoke grenade, creating confusion and forcing the enemy to reveal their positions. A few days later, a series of clumsy reconnaissance probes began. Adam's fiancée, a woman I'd met only twice, suddenly liked a photo of me on Instagram from 3 years ago. It was a clumsy attempt to get on my radar. Then, a friend request on Facebook from a great-aunt in Ohio I hadn't spoken to since I was 10. They were trying to breach my perimeter, to find a crack in my information defenses. The campaign escalated. The pinnacle of their clumsy espionage was a missed call from my father. I was mixing a cocktail in the kitchen when my phone buzzed on the granite countertop. His name, Frank Hayes, flashed on the screen. For my entire life, that name appearing on my phone had triggered an involuntary jolt of anxiety, a reflexive bracing for criticism or a demand. But this time, watching the screen light up, I felt nothing of the sort. No fear, no dread. For the first time, I felt only a cool, calm sense of power. I had learned a critical lesson in officer training. Information is power, and the one who controls the flow of information controls the battlefield. I let the phone ring, and ring, and ring, until it finally fell silent. My silence was the only answer he was going to get. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach me. 2 days later, Mia called me, her voice buzzing with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Oh my God, Kenia, they are losing their minds up here, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. Uncle Frank is telling everyone you probably ran off and are bartending somewhere, burning through your savings. Aunt Carol told Mrs. Henderson next door that you had a complete mental breakdown and had to be sent away for your own good. I listened, a quiet laugh escaping my lips. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but of profound, ironic satisfaction. They were still operating from an old playbook, fighting a war that was already over. Their entire strategy was based on a version of me that no longer existed. Kenia the failure, Kenia the disappointment. They needed me to be that person, because my success would invalidate the core tenets of their entire worldview. Mia, I said calmly, interrupting her frantic report. I walked out onto the balcony, the vast, shimmering expanse of the Gulf of Mexico spreading out before me. Bartenders don't usually live in houses with a private beach. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she processed this new piece of intelligence. You have a house? On the beach? The astonishment in her voice was palpable. Yes, Mia, I said. Another beat of silence. Then, the inevitable question, the one her parents had undoubtedly sent her to ask. Did you buy it? She whispered, as if the very idea was too fantastical to say out loud. I looked out at the horizon, where the setting sun was painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. I thought about the decade of sacrifice, the lonely nights, the relentless discipline. And I gave her the simple, unvarnished truth that I knew would detonate like a bomb in that little house in Aliquippa. I didn't buy it, Mia, I said, my voice clear and steady. I built it. The silence on the other end of the line was longer this time, heavier. I knew that my message, my declaration of independence, would be relayed back to command headquarters in Pennsylvania almost immediately. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that they wouldn't be sending a scout next time. They would have to come themselves. Exactly 1 week after Mia's phone call, just as I had predicted, the emissary arrived. It was Adam. Of course, it was Adam. My brother. The golden boy. My home security system pinged my phone with a notification that a vehicle was at the front gate, and I watched the live feed from what I had come to call my second-story observation post, the balcony off my master bedroom. He pulled up in a C6 Corvette, probably a decade old, its once gleaming black paint now showing swirls and fine scratches in the bright Florida sun. The engine made a tired, rattling sound when he shut it off, the sound of a machine trying to project power it no longer possessed. Adam himself was a reflection of his car. He wore a crisp, pink Ralph Lauren polo shirt, but it was just a little too tight across his shoulders, straining at the seams as if he was trying to physically inhabit a role that no longer fit him. He was playing the part of the successful, concerned older brother, but the costume was ill-fitting. He stepped out of the car and stood before the towering wrought iron gates, craning his neck to take in the sheer scale of the house. His face was a perfect, unfiltered blend of astonishment and disbelief. He looked like a man whose entire understanding of the world had just been violently upended. One of the fundamental rules of his universe, that he was the successful one and I was the failure, had just been proven false. I let him wait. For 10 full minutes, I watched him stand there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other under the oppressive glare of the midday sun. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to feel, for the first time in his life, like an outsider. I wanted him to understand that he was no longer in Pennsylvania. He was on my territory, now. Finally, I buzzed the gate open and went downstairs to meet him. I didn't greet him at the front door. Instead, I waited for him in the courtyard, by the edge of the infinity pool that blended seamlessly with the blue of the Gulf. I controlled the environment. I didn't invite him into my home. I met him in a neutral, outdoor space that still loudly proclaimed my success. Adam, I said, my voice perfectly level as he approached. What brings the Pennsylvania breeze all the way down here? He tried to muster his old, familiar smirk, the one that had always put me in my place, but it faltered on his lips, looking more like a grimace. Hey sis, he said, his voice overly casual. Just in the area for some business, thought I'd swing by and see how you were doing. Mom's been worried sick. The lie was so clumsy, so transparent, it was almost insulting. I didn't smile. I just looked him directly in the eye, holding his gaze until he started to squirm. Worried? I asked, my voice dropping a notch. Or did she send you on a reconnaissance mission? His practiced smile vanished completely. Busted. He knew he'd been caught. He broke eye contact, his gaze flitting around the courtyard, taking in the manicured landscaping, the outdoor kitchen, the sheer, unapologetic luxury of it all. I could see the gears turning in his head, the mental calculation of what all this must have cost. His posture, once so confident, seemed to shrink. All right, fine, he finally admitted, a note of petulant frustration creeping into his tone. They don't believe it. Dad's convinced you shacked up with some rich old guy. Mom thinks you won the lottery. No one. No one believes you could have done this. He gestured vaguely at the house, at my life. Not on your own. His words confirmed my entire strategic assessment. It wasn't just that they didn't believe in my success, they fundamentally couldn't accept its source. To acknowledge that I had achieved this through my own intelligence and discipline would be to acknowledge that their lifelong judgment of me had been completely, utterly wrong. And for people like them, admitting a mistake is a fate worse than death. And what was your specific objective, Adam? I pressed, my voice as cold and clinical as a surgeon's scalpel. Confirm the rumors and report back to command. He didn't answer. He just stared at the shimmering surface of the pool. His silence was a confession. And in that moment of silence, I saw it. It flashed in his eyes, raw and unguarded. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't pride. It was pure, undiluted envy. The bitter, corrosive envy of a man who had been told his entire life that he was the winner, the champion, the star. Now forced to confront the reality that the quiet, overlooked soldier he had always dismissed had won a victory he couldn't even comprehend. The former high school quarterback had peaked at 18, and he knew it. They want to see you, he said finally, the words sounding like he was relaying an order from a superior officer. A small, humorless laugh escaped my lips. No, Adam, I corrected him gently, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. They don't want to see me. They want to see what I have. He had no counter-argument. The truth of my statement was undeniable. He started to turn away, his failed mission clearly at an end. Before he could retreat, I gave him his final directive. Adam, I said, my voice stopping him in his tracks. He turned back, a flicker of his old arrogance returning, as if expecting me to relent. Tell them, I said, my voice calm but laced with the unbreakable finality of a command, that if they want to talk, they can come themselves next time. I'm done receiving messages through emissaries. I watched him walk away, the too-tight polo shirt seeming to constrict him even more. His raid had been a catastrophic failure, and he was about to deliver a report that would force the generals onto the battlefield themselves. They came on a Tuesday morning. There was no phone call, no text message, no warning. They just appeared as if summoned by my defiance. They operated under the assumption that their parental authority was a universal key, capable of unlocking any door I might try to close. My security camera sent an alert to my phone. A white rental sedan was parked outside my gate. I pulled up the feed. It was them. My father, Frank, stood with his shoulders thrown back, his jaw set, looking less like a visiting parent and more like a general arriving to inspect a rogue outpost. My mother, Carol, stood beside him, her face obscured by a pair of oversized designer sunglasses that looked comical and out of place. They were an emotional shield, a cheap prop in the drama she was about to direct. They pressed the intercom button. I watched the notification on my phone and did nothing. A minute later, it buzzed again. I let it ring. I wanted them to understand that this was no longer their territory. This was a fortified border, and entry was not guaranteed. After the third ring, I finally walked to the massive mahogany front door. I turned the deadbolt, the sound echoing with metallic finality in the marble foyer, and opened it. But only a crack. I positioned my body in the opening, a physical barrier, a human gate. My threshold, my final line of defense. My father spoke first, his eyes scanning what little he could see of the house behind me. So, it's real, he grunted. There was no hello, no greeting. It wasn't a question. It was a cold, flat confirmation of fact, the first words he had spoken to me in months. My mother pushed her sunglasses up onto her head, her eyes, hard and calculating, darting past me into the foyer. Adam wasn't lying. You're really living in a place like this. There was a raw, unconcealed bitterness in her voice, the sound of a lifetime of envy coming to a boil. They weren't looking at me, the daughter they had thrown away. They were looking at the spoils of a victory they couldn't comprehend. Then my mother executed a classic psychological warfare tactic. She thrust a plastic Tupperware container forward. It was filled with her homemade chocolate chip cookies, the ones she used to make for Adam after his football games. It was a pathetic, transparent peace offering, a Trojan horse made of flour and sugar. "I baked these for you," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit maternal warmth. I looked down at the container, then back up at her face. The mask of a loving mother was slipping, revealing the cold strategist beneath. "I don't eat sweets," I lied, my voice devoid of any emotion. I made no move to take the container. My father's thin veneer of patience evaporated. He took an aggressive step forward, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me, a tactic that had worked for 29 years. "Where'd you get the money for all this?" he demanded, his tone that of a prosecutor cornering a lying witness on the stand. This was the moment, the opening for my counter-assault. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I met his glare with an icy calm. By not wasting my life trying to prove myself to people who were never going to believe in me anyway. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. He was speechless. But my mother, ever the pragmatist, saw her opening and went straight for the primary objective of their mission. She stepped forward, placing a hand on my father's arm, and turned the full force of her faux sincerity on me. "Listen, Kenya," she began, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We're family. And Adam's business, it's been having a tough time. You could help him. You know, invest in your brother." And there it was. The demand wrapped in the language of love. The invoice for a childhood of neglect. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all was what finally broke my control. The anger that I had kept locked away for years, the cold, disciplined rage, surged through me. A laugh, sharp and humorless, escaped my lips. "Family." I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air between us like a bad smell. "That's hilarious. When I was a soldier with nothing to my name, you called me trash and threw me out of my own home. Now that you think I have money, you show up on my doorstep talking about family and investments?" Their faces cycled through a rapid series of emotions, from entitled confidence to righteous indignation, and finally, to a state of utter confusion. The script had been flipped. The quiet, obedient daughter was gone, and in her place was a stranger they didn't know how to fight. They were soldiers trained for trench warfare who had suddenly found themselves in a dogfight. Before they could regroup and launch another attack, I knew I had to end this engagement on my own terms. If you have ever had to be the one to finally say no and draw a line in the sand with family, hit the like button for every time you wish you'd had the strength to do it sooner. And comment with the word boundary if you believe that protecting your peace is not a crime. I looked from my father's stunned face to my mother's crumbling composure. I gave them their final order. "This visit is over." And then I slammed the door in their faces. The sound of the heavy wood crashing into the frame was a thunderclap. It wasn't just the sound of a door closing, it was the sound of a border being sealed, a wall being erected. It was the sound of a boundary, finally being forged in steel. The moment the door slammed shut, my phone became a war zone. The declaration of my boundary was interpreted as a declaration of war. An immediate and relentless artillery barrage began. Missed calls from my father, my mother, and Adam stacked up on my screen like spent shell casings. They didn't leave voicemails. The calls were silent, hanging assertions of their right to my attention, a form of low-grade psychological terrorism designed to wear me down. When the calls went unanswered, the text messages started. My father led the charge, his words blunt and crude, like shrapnel. "Who the hell do you think you are, slamming a door in my face? You don't just walk away from family. We made you. You owe us." He didn't talk about love or connection. He talked about ownership, as if I were a stock he had invested in, now refusing to pay dividends. His words were a claim, a demand for payment on a debt I had never agreed to. When his frontal assault of intimidation failed to breach my defenses, my mother shifted tactics. She launched a campaign of emotional guerrilla warfare. Long, rambling texts began to arrive at all hours, each one a carefully crafted guilt bomb. She wrote about the sleepless nights when I was a sick child, about the sacrifices she'd made, the dreams she'd given up. I only ever wanted what was best for you, Kenya. A family is supposed to lean on each other. How can you be so heartless to your own brother? He is your blood. She weaponized memory, transforming shared history into ammunition. She was trying to trigger the old guilt reflexes that had kept me in line for 29 years. For my entire life, that particular brand of ammunition had always found its mark. But the soldier she was firing at no longer existed. The sergeant who had taken her place was now equipped with a new kind of emotional body armor. I read the messages, acknowledged the tactic, and deleted them without reply. During the long nights of the siege, sleep was impossible. The house was silent, but my mind was a cacophony of their typed and spoken words. I would take my headphones and go sit by the pool. The water's placid surface a stark contrast to the turmoil being directed at me. I didn't listen to music. I listened to Brené Brown. On those nights, her calm, reassuring Texas accent became my commanding officer, my spiritual advisor. I listened to her TED Talks and audiobooks, absorbing her words like a soldier absorbing a critical briefing before a mission. I heard her say, "Clear is kind, unclear is unkind." I heard her explain that setting boundaries is not an act of aggression, but an act of self-respect. She gave a name to the guilt my mother was trying to weaponize. She called it shame. She talked about how we are not responsible for other people's disappointment when we refuse to be manipulated. Her words weren't a revelation. They were a confirmation. They provided the academic and psychological framework for what my gut, my training, and my very survival instinct had been telling me all along. This wasn't love, it was control. This wasn't family, it was a hostage situation. And I realized that the only way to truly end it wasn't to build a higher wall or dig a deeper trench. The only way was to redraw the map entirely and declare my own sovereign territory. So I did not reply to a single text. I did not answer a single call. My continued silence was a psychological counteroffensive, and I could tell it was driving them to desperation. But my silence wasn't passive. I wasn't just hiding in my fortress. I was in my command center, planning my definitive strike. I spent my days on the phone, not with them, but with a team of people who operated on logic and law, not on guilt and obligation. I had retained one of the top law firms in Florida, a powerhouse group that specialized in wealth management and, more importantly, high-conflict family disputes. They understood the enemy's tactics better than I did. One night, I took my laptop up to the rooftop terrace. The vast black expanse of the Gulf of Mexico stretched out before me, silent and infinite. The only light came from the cool, blue-white glow of my screen. On it was the final draft of a legal document my new team had prepared. It was precise. It was clinical. It was utterly devoid of emotion. It was my ultimate weapon. They could lay siege to my peace with an endless barrage of words and weaponized memories. But I was about to return fire with something they had no defense against: the law. When their psychological siege failed to produce my surrender, they did exactly what I knew they would do. They launched an all-out ground assault. It was late on a Friday afternoon, a time they probably calculated I'd be at my weakest, winding down from the week. Their rented sedan appeared at my gate again, its presence on my security feed feeling less like a visit and more like a violation. This time, they didn't bother with the intercom. They waited, lurking like predators in a cheaply made metal box, until a UPS delivery truck was buzzed through. In a move of brazen entitlement, they tailgated the truck, speeding through the gates before they could close. It was a flagrant breach of my perimeter, a trespass. But I was ready. I had already given my small, discreet security team their orders. The two men, both former military police, understood the rules of engagement perfectly. Observe, I had told them. Record everything. You are witnesses. Do not intervene unless there is physical violence. I wasn't just protecting myself physically, I was protecting the truth. I wanted an objective third-party record of their aggression. General Patton once said, "Never let the enemy pick the battleground." I had let them come to me, but this final confrontation would take place on my chosen field. the rooftop terrace, my command post. It offered a panoramic view of the Gulf, a vast, calming expanse of blue that reminded me of the world I'd built, a world far removed from the suffocating confines of their bitterness. I waited for them there, seated in a comfortable armchair, the setting sun casting long shadows across the travertine tiles. A tall glass of iced tea, sweating in the humid air, sat on the table beside me. From my vantage point, I saw them emerge from the stairwell door. The climb had clearly taken its toll. They stood there for a moment, panting and flushed, looking utterly out of place, their simmering rust-belt resentment clashing with the serene, sun-drenched luxury of the terrace. My father's face was beet red, a dangerous combination of exertion and pure rage. My mother tried to project an air of calm authority, her oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a bizarre crown. But the white-knuckled grip she had on her designer knockoff purse betrayed her agitation. And Adam trailed behind them like a disgraced aide-de-camp, his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding my gaze completely. He had failed his mission, and now he was here to witness the fallout. They had come expecting to find me cornered, intimidated, and ready to negotiate. Instead, they found me waiting, calmly, patiently, as if I had been expecting them all along. "We need to talk," my father barked, his voice attempting to reclaim the tone of command that had always silenced me before. He strode forward, planting himself in front of me, trying to use his height to loom over me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea before answering, letting the ice cubes clink gently against the glass. I let the silence hang for a beat, a small act of defiance that immediately shifted the balance of power. Then I cut him off, my voice even and entirely devoid of the tremor he expected. "I agree," I said, meeting his furious gaze. "Let's talk. There's so much to cover. We can start with the day you called me uneducated trash in my own childhood home. Or maybe we could talk about the moment Mom threw me out while my own brother watched and did nothing. We could discuss the Christmases where I was ignored, or the years where every single one of my academic and military accomplishments was dismissed as worthless." I leaned forward slightly. "Which topic would you like to address first?" The words, the truths I had swallowed and choked on for a lifetime, were unleashed. They weren't delivered as a scream of anger, but as a volley of precise, targeted fire. Each sentence was a round striking its mark, tearing through their paper-thin armor of self-righteousness. They froze, their expressions a mixture of shock and outrage. They had come here to make demands, to lecture, to take. They were utterly unprepared to be confronted with the unvarnished reality of their own actions. For the first time in their lives, the mirror was being held up to their faces, and they didn't recognize the monsters staring back. My father sputtered, his authority crumbling into a weak, pathetic defense. That was to make you tougher," he stammered, his eyes darting toward my mother for support. "We wanted you to be strong." I rose from my chair, my movements slow and deliberate. I walked to the glass railing at the edge of the terrace and stood before him, looking him directly in the eye, something I had never dared to do before. "No," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "You didn't want me to be strong. You couldn't handle a strong daughter who didn't follow the path you laid out for her. You needed someone to blame for your own disappointments, for a life that didn't turn out the way you thought you deserved." I then turned my gaze to my mother, who flinched as if I had physically struck her. "And you," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, not with pity, but with a kind of clinical sadness. "You needed a sacrifice for your golden boy. You needed someone to be small so he could feel big. A daughter's purpose, in your world, was to be the supporting actress in her brother's starring role." Finally, I stepped back, creating a space between us. A physical representation of the emotional chasm that had always been there. I delivered my closing statement, the core belief I had forged in the fires of their neglect. A family doesn't demand proof that you're worthy of their love. A family doesn't go MIA when you're struggling, only to reappear with their hands out when you succeed. I let the words settle in the quiet air between us, a final, undeniable truth. My father, his face ashen, all the fight drained out of him, whispered a question, more to himself than to me. So this is it then? This is the end? I didn't give him the dignity of a direct answer. His opinion, his validation, his very presence in my life no longer mattered. Instead, I turned my head slightly toward the doorway, where my two security staff, dressed in casual polo shirts and slacks, had been standing silently, observing the entire exchange. They were my witnesses, my silent guardians. I gave the man in the lead a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Please escort my guests out," I commanded, my voice ringing with an authority they had never heard before. The next morning, I woke before the sun. In the pre-dawn stillness, the house was profoundly quiet. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of tension. The low-grade hum of anxiety that had been my constant companion for weeks, the feeling of waiting for the next attack, was gone. The battle was over. The silence that remained was deep and peaceful. I walked through the dark, silent rooms of my house, my bare feet cool on the stone floors, and felt a stillness settle in my soul for the first time in years. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee and carried my mug into my home office. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of the monitor I'd left on. On my large oak desk, a thick leather-bound document sat waiting. It had been delivered by a paralegal the evening before. Beside it lay a single object, a heavy black fountain pen with a silver clip. It had been a gift from my first commanding officer upon my graduation from officer candidate school. He told me, "A leader's signature is their bond. Never sign anything you don't believe in." I had carried that pen with me on every deployment, signed every order and after-action report with it. Now, it would serve its most important mission. The document wasn't a letter. There was no room for emotion, for accusations, or for pleas for understanding. It was a legal instrument drafted by my attorneys with the cold, irrefutable precision of a military order. The cover page read, "Declaration of familial severance and cessation of all obligations." It was the instrument of my freedom. I sat down and read through it one last time, even though I knew every word by heart. It stated in unambiguous legal terms that any and all financial, hereditary, or implied familial obligations between myself, Kenya Hayes, and Frank Carroll and Adam Hayes were hereby rendered null and void, effective upon the date of signing. It also included a petition for a restraining order, which, once filed, would legally prohibit them from coming within 500 yards of my residence or place of work. This wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of self-preservation. It was me, building a legal firewall to protect the peace I had fought so hard to win. An old memory surfaced, a conversation with an army chaplain in a dusty tent in Afghanistan. I had been struggling with the moral complexities of war, and he had quoted a Bible verse to me. "You shall know the truth," he'd said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos, "and the truth shall set you free." For years, I thought he was talking about some grand, cosmic truth, but sitting there, in the quiet of my office, I finally understood. The truth was simple and painful. This relationship was unsalvageable, and accepting that truth was my only path to freedom. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about reconciliation, it was about release. I was forgiving them for not being the family I needed so that I could finally stop waiting for them to become it. I uncapped the pen. The nib scratched softly against the thick linen paper as I signed my name on the final page. Sergeant Kenya Hayes. The ink was black and definitive, a clean, sharp line drawn between my past and my future. At precisely 8 a.m., as planned, a bonded courier service picked up 2 copies of the document. The first was sent via overnight express to the small house in Aliquippa, an official delivery that would require a signature. The second was sent to the law firm Adam had hastily retained in the days following the confrontation on my terrace. I had anticipated their moves. I left no flank exposed. Once the packages were sent, I went into my phone's settings and blocked their numbers. Then I turned off all notifications for my social media. I didn't need to see their reaction. I didn't need to hear their rage or their pleas. The outcome was already determined. I had dictated the terms of the ceasefire, and they were non-negotiable. The rest of the morning passed in a strange, serene quiet. I went for a long walk on the beach, letting the waves wash over my feet, feeling the tension of a lifetime slowly draining out of my body. It was an odd mix of emotions, a profound sense of relief, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, and a quiet, lingering sadness for the family that never was. Just before noon, a single text message made it through my digital blockade. It was from Mia. "Kenia, what is going on?" Aunt Carol just called my mom, crying hysterically. She said Uncle Frank is screaming his head off. They got a letter from a lawyer. They're totally losing it. I read the text, and I waited for the feeling I thought I was supposed to have. A surge of triumphant satisfaction, a jolt of vengeful glee. But none of it came. Instead, I just felt a deep, quiet, and strangely empty peace. Their chaos was a storm raging on a distant shore, its sound muffled and irrelevant. Their panic was simply the sound of an old, broken system collapsing under the weight of its own toxicity. They hadn't lost a war because I was stronger or smarter. They had lost because they had chosen to fight with the wrong weapons. They had used shame, guilt, and intimidation. I had used the truth and the law. A year has passed since the ceasefire, a year of profound, uninterrupted quiet. I didn't sell the villa. The thought crossed my mind, but I realized it had become more than just a house to me. It was a symbol, a fortress of solitude that I had transformed into a beacon of hope. I don't live here alone anymore. The vast, echoing rooms are now filled with energy, with ideas, with the sounds of futures being built. This house has become the unofficial headquarters for a foundation I created, a way to transmute the pain of my past into a purpose for my future. I called it the Hayes Resilience Grant. I decided that my family name would no longer be synonymous with the rust and bitterness of a dying steel town. I would redefine it. From this day forward, the name Hayes would stand for resilience. The grant provides scholarships and seed capital for female veterans, women like me, who possess the discipline, the drive, and the talent, but lack the familial support system that so many take for granted. On Saturday afternoons, my courtyard is no longer a silent sanctuary. It's a bustling incubator of dreams. The air, once still, now buzzes with excited conversation and laughter. Today, a group of 5 women are gathered around the large teak table by the pool. Maria, a former Army medic with a quiet intensity, is walking us through the business plan for a mental health app she's developing for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Her passion is palpable, her vision clear. Across from her, Sarah, a sharp-witted former Air Force engineer, unrolls a set of blueprints for a modular solar panel company she's launching. Her designs are brilliant, innovative, and I know she's going to change the world. I sit among them, listening, asking questions, offering advice. I'm not just their benefactor, I'm their mentor, their peer, their sister in arms. We share war stories, both the kind from the battlefield and the kind from the home front. We talk about the invisible scars we all carry and the audacious dreams that keep us moving forward. This, I realize, is the family I'd been searching for my entire life. Not a family bound by the random lottery of blood, but one forged in the fires of shared experience. A family built on a foundation of mutual respect, unconditional support, and a collective drive to build something better. A chosen family. Occasionally, I still get news from the old world. Mia serves as a reluctant correspondent, passing on little fragments of information. Adam's used car dealership, the one my parents wanted me to invest in, went bankrupt 6 months ago. Apparently, his charm and high school football trophies weren't enough to sustain a business. My parents were forced to sell the house in Aliquippa, the one filled with so many ghosts, and move into a small 2-bedroom apartment. Mia says they never, ever mention my name. It's as if their youngest child, the daughter who became a sergeant, the one they cast out, simply ceased to exist. When I hear this, I feel nothing. Not sadness, not satisfaction. Just a quiet, neutral emptiness. They are no longer characters in my story. They are simply a chapter in a book I finished reading a long time ago. Their world, defined by bitterness and blame, has grown smaller and smaller, collapsing in on itself. My world, the one I built from scratch, grows larger and more vibrant every day. Later that evening, after the last of the women has gone home, their minds buzzing with new possibilities, I take my customary walk along the beach. The day is ending, and the sun, a fiery orange orb, sinks slowly into the horizon, setting the sky and the sea ablaze with color. The warm sand gives way under my bare feet. I'm no longer the soldier on high alert, scanning for threats. I'm no longer the investor, calculating risk and reward. In this moment, I'm just Kenya, a woman standing on a piece of the world she created for herself, breathing in the clean, salt-tinged air of her own freedom. That long-ago expulsion order, the words meant to break me, to define me as worthless, did not destroy me. In the end, they liberated me. My parents had commanded me to get out, and for the first and last time, I had obeyed their order perfectly. I got out. I disappeared from their small, toxic world, and in doing so, I was reborn into a much larger one of my own making. And here, in the quiet glow of a self-made dawn, I have finally found peace. Mission complete. Thank you for listening to my journey. My mission to liberate myself is complete, but I know that for so many of you, your own missions are still ongoing. Every day is a battle to protect your peace and build your own dawn. This channel is more than just stories. It's a command post for survivors, a community for those who have walked through fire and refused to be consumed. If my journey has given you strength, please like this video to show your support for all of us, subscribe to join our growing community, and share a part of your own story of resilience in the comments below. You are not alone.